Hi, this is Daryl Tano of Solutions Reservoir, and welcome to Cybersecurity in the U.S. Department of Defense, Part 3 of our three-part cybersecurity tutorial. These videos follow the more comprehensive and timely material on the Solutions Reservoir website. As before, pause on slides with backgrounds to review reference material. Part 1 was an introduction to cybersecurity, and Part 2 discussed the U.S. government's role in the field. Part 3 looks at key references and focuses on the DoD and its cybersecurity alignment with other parts of the government, exemplified by the adoption of NIST SP 853 as the basis for security controls for national security systems, NSS, which include DoD systems. We'll also discuss how security controls are tailored for NSS, looking at CNSSI 1253 like we did for SP 853 in Part 2. The alignment of DoD systems was driven by a cross-governmental working group, the JTF. Here are examples of alignments and changes fostered by this group. Note that some of the items on the left side, like DIACAP, remain well-known terms and will exist on the internet for a long time. Key reference documents we'll discuss are Department of Defense Instruction 8500.01, whose subject is cybersecurity, and DoD 8510.01, the RMF for DoDIT. We covered NIST SP 853 in Part 2, so we'll only touch on it here. It is a fundamental reference to the more visible CNSSI 1253. The website has links for all of these. The change of terms from information assurance to cybersecurity was called out in DoDI 8500.01, which is largely a policy document. Merely by reference, it incorporates a number of standards. They're listed in its first appendix called Enclosure 1. For example, Enclosure 1 calls out these three standards, which we saw in Part 2. Note the reference label for this one, CH. After being listed in Enclosure 1, standards or documents are referred to by these labels. As a policy document, 8500.01 calls out these other two fundamental documents. DoD 8510.01 is where the new risk management framework for DoDIT supplanted the DIACAP. 8510 also incorporates, by reference, a number of standards, including these. Enclosure 3, RMF Procedures, discusses the use of Security Requirements Guides and Security Technical Implementation Guides, SRGs and STIGs. And Enclosure 6 addresses the core of the RMF for DoDIT. I've placed discussions of Enclosures 3 and 6, including overviews of SRGs and STIGs, on the following reference slide, after which we'll look at the stepwise process of the RMF for DoDIT. Here's the stepwise process of the risk management framework for DoD information systems and platform IT systems. Should you encounter an old DIACAP diagram, this is what replaced it. We'll come back to it in a moment, but look how similar it is to the RMF discussed in Part 2. Note the same 6 steps in the RMF outlined in SP 837. Note the proviso about CNSSI 1253 providing guidance in steps 1 and 2 for NSS. Remember, though, that SP 853 underlies CNSSI 1253. Back to the RMF for DoDIT, noting steps 1 and 2. The Committee on National Security Systems looks out for the cybersecurity concerns for government NSS. As noted, their Instruction 1253, Security Categorization and Control Selection for NSS, provides guidance on RMF steps 1 and 2 for NSS. The NIST publications are more fundamental, so 1253 provides guidance on overlays and specifies values for open parameters, and where categorization and control selections for NSS diverge from non-NSS. The two reference slides coming up pertain to 1253's guidance in RMF steps 1 and 2. Then we'll talk about some of 1253's differences with NIST. For step 1, for step 2. In looking at differences for NSS, first off, 1253 does adopt FIPS 199's approach on the impact values and security objectives we covered in Part 2, but it makes some refinements to the definitions for moderate and high impact and explicitly defines certain other associations. But a major distinction is that 1253 does not follow FIPS 200's high watermark approach to the security categorization of the information system. It's probably easier to show you what that means by relooking at an example from 853 and then contrasting it with 1253. Here's the slide from 853 on the access control family that we used in Part 2. Controls are applied for either a low, medium, or high impact system. Recall that by the level high watermark concept, if C and I were moderate but A were high, then you had a high impact system and applied controls per the high column. In Part 2, we showed this as going down the information types to get system CINA values, and then across CINA to determine the high water mark of the system. Here's the corresponding access controls family guide of CNSSI 1253, Table D1. Immediately, you notice that C, I, and A retain respective low, medium, and high values because you only go down C, I, and A and don't go across to get a single system-wide value. In this table, the NIST SP 853 baselines are expressed as X, and the additional SP 853 controls needed for NSS are indicated by the plus sign. Therefore, the NSS baseline per control element, or row, is indicated by the X and the plus sign. We'll come back to this in a moment. Looking another way, the initial control set is derived as the SP 853 baselines, the X in this table, plus additional controls for NSS, the plus in the table, plus applicable overlays or additional measures, which are found in 1253 Appendix F. Let's say your system CINA were determined as medium, medium, high. The X's are the 853 baselines, and the pluses are the additional 853 controls for NSS. Together, the red and blue here are the NSS baseline controls for a medium, medium, high potential impact system. Then you go to the 1253 Appendix F to see about overlays. As mentioned, guidance for the additional controls is provided in Table D2. Here are the justifications for the additional controls, AC2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 10, and 12, we saw as pluses on the last slide. Finally, we tailor the initial control set to align it more closely to account for conditions affecting the specific system. Tailoring is guided by parts of 1253 and 853, including Appendix E in 1253. Then determine if additional controls are still needed. If so, add them and document everything in the system security plan. In Part 3, we've covered the cybersecurity alignment of national security systems with other parts of the government, noting some important changes wrought by the alignment. We've also covered tailoring security controls for NSS using CNSSI 1253 on top of SP 853. This concludes our three-part series, Introduction to Cybersecurity. I hope you found it informative. For a deeper view, please visit the website. Thanks a lot.